Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah.
We spent a pretty significant amount of time on this show unpacking these sweeping historical eras.
Right, or massive sociological shifts.
Exactly. But today, we have a very different mission.
I do.
We are zooming in on the life and, I guess you'd call it the highly unconventional career trajectory of the American author Richard Curry.
It really is unconventional.
Yeah. We're essentially tracing the path of a young man who begins his journey in the mountains of West Virginia, serves as a Navy medical corpsman during the Vietnam era, embeds himself in the intellectual ecosystem of a historically black college and university, and then ultimately emerges as a Pulitzer Nominated literary voice.
It's an incredible arc because it's a biography that essentially maps out the fractures and really the cultural syntheses of late 20th century America.
Right.
When we look at the specific milestones of his life, we are looking at a masterclass and gathering wildly divergent perspectives. We will be connecting the dots today between his frontline military medical experience and his development into an author capable of tackling the really profound intersection of trauma, geography, and human resilience.
So let's unpack this by starting at the geographical beginning.
A place to start.
Richard Curry was born in 1949 in Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Right.
Which places his formative coming-of-age years directly on a collision course with the late 1960s. For you listening, think about what that means. You have the inherent isolation and the distinct cultural bedrock of Appalachia serving as his foundation, just as the broader national landscape is fundamentally fracturing.
Completely fracturing. You've got the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement.
Massive generational shift.
Exactly. And the contrast there is vital to understanding his observational lens later in life. Parkersburg provides a very specific grounding. It's a perspective tied to landscape, to working class realities, and regional tradition. But the geopolitical realities of the late 1960s, they didn't really allow for isolation.
No, the broader world intruded aggressively on almost every young man of that generation.
It did. And for Curry, that intrusion materialized as military service. He served as a Navy medical corpsman between 1968 and 1972.
Stepping directly into the most turbulent window of the Vietnam War era.
Right into it.
And we frequently discuss the combat experience on this show, but serving as a medical corpsman that demands a completely different psychological posture.
What's fascinating here is the unique psychological burden of that specific role.
Because you're embedded in the violence.
Often attached directly to Marine infantry units.
Right in the absolute thick of the conflict. But your primary directive is preservation.
In an environment engineered for destruction.
Exactly.
A combat medic or corpsman experiences war through the lens of pure consequence. They are not merely observing the geopolitical conflict. They are tasked with managing the immediate, visceral destruction of the human body.
It's urgent, desperate triage.
Yes. It is a role defined by triage. You are constantly making instantaneous life and death decisions under extreme duress, evaluating who can be saved and who cannot.
Which strips away all societal superficiality.
Completely. It forces an individual into this intimate confrontation with mortality. You're exposing them to human vulnerability at its absolute limit.
It essentially serves as a hyper-accelerated, incredibly traumatic education in the human condition.
That's a great way to put it.
You are observing people stripped down to their absolute essence, both physically and psychologically.
And it builds an indelible psychological foundation. For a future writer, this environment demands the development of a ruthless observational eye.
How so?
Well, think about the mechanics of triage. You must accurately assess a chaotic situation, identify the most critical rupture, and apply a stabilizing intervention. That mechanical process of medical triage in a war zone translates profoundly into the mechanics of writing.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Right. An author must look at the chaos of the human experience, locate the emotional or narrative rupture, and attempt to articulate it. Curry was learning how to observe human fragility long before he was putting it down on paper.
So we look at how he reintegrates into civilian life with that heavy foundation. By 1972, his time in the service concludes.
He's out.
And he returns to his home state to enroll at West Virginia University, where he stays until 1974.
Which is the expected path of reintegration.
Yeah, on paper, this is a very standard recalibration. Returning to the familiar geography of Appalachia to seek higher education after a traumatic deployment, it's a highly logical maneuver to regain equilibrium.
You seek out the cultural baseline you knew before the interruption of war.
Right.
However, what he does next demonstrates a profound intellectual restlessness.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, it does.
In 1974, he leaves West Virginia University and transfers to Howard University in Washington, D.C.
A historically black college and university.
Yes, and he remains there until 1979. So for you listening, let's frame this. We are talking about a white military veteran from rural Appalachia, immersing himself in the premier academic institution of black intellectual thought and culture during the mid to late 1970s.
This is the critical pivot. This elevates his biography from a standard veteran narrative into something deeply complex.
It's a massive shift.
Think about the cultural milieu of Washington, D.C. and Howard University in that specific post-civil rights era window. It is a vibrant, politically charged nexus of discourse, art, and sociology.
And by choosing to step into that environment, Curry is actively seeking out a perspective entirely decentered from his own origins.
He is not retreating into the familiar. He is deliberately seeking a collision of worldviews.
You synthesize those experiences, and you get an incredibly rare perceptual triad.
Yes.
You have the white Appalachian socioeconomic background, the searing trauma of combat medical triage, and the rich, rigorous black intellectual framework of 1970s Howard University.
He is gathering the diverse vernaculars of the American experience. And that triad is the engine of his literary voice. A lesser writer might only be able to view the world through the single lens of their trauma, or the single lens of their geography.
But Curry's time at Howard suggests a deep desire to understand how his personal experiences fit into a much broader, vastly more diverse national tapestry.
It cultivates an empathy and an intellectual agility that becomes highly apparent when we look at the timeline of his published work.
So let's trace that timeline, because his active publishing years run from 1974, which coincides perfectly with his arrival at Howard, through 1997.
And his bibliography is anchored by three distinct themes.
Military service, family, and West Virginia life.
Right.
And we can see his evolution as a thinker by walking chronologically through the major releases. His first listed book arrives in 1980. Titled Crossing Over, a Vietnam Journal.
The format of a journal is a crucial starting point here.
It suggests a documentary approach.
Yes, exactly. 8 years after removing the uniform, he is engaging in the necessary first step of trauma processing, externalizing the raw, unvarnished memory.
Getting it down on paper.
Right. Before a writer can manipulate an experience into fiction or broader metaphor, they often have to get the literal reality of it out of their own head. Crossing Over serves as that initial, unfiltered translation of his frontline reality into the public sphere.
But then we see a distinct shift as the decade progresses.
We do.
In 1988, he releases Fatal Light, and in 1990, The Wars of Heaven.
The transition from a journal to these highly evocative metaphorical titles points toward a leap from documentary processing into the realm of pure literature.
Fiction allows an author to utilize narrative distance.
Right. It allows them to explore universal truths that strict nonfiction might constrain. With titles like Fatal Light and The Wars of Heaven, we can infer a writer who is no longer just reporting on what happened to him.
He's using the mechanics of art to ask broader philosophical questions.
Questions about mortality, conflict, and the spiritual weight of his Appalachian roots. He is synthesizing those three pillars we mentioned earlier into complex literary narratives.
Then, in 1992, he publishes Medicine for Sale, Commercialism versus Professionalism.
Which is an incredibly sharp pivot.
It's a massive left turn. We go from nuanced literary explorations of war and geography straight into a hardcore nonfiction critique of the American healthcare industry.
On the surface, it feels disconnected from his previous work.
It really does.
But if we trace his origins, that pivot is not just connected, it is inevitable.
Because of his time as a corpsman.
We must remember his foundational training. In a combat zone, the application of medical care is governed by absolute necessity. Triage is a purely utilitarian, desperate act untethered from capital.
You provide care because human survival demands it.
Exactly. So when you take a practitioner whose ethical baseline was forged in that life-or-death, uncommercialized environment, and you place them into the civilian healthcare system of the 1990s.
A system increasingly defined by profit margins and insurance bureaucracy.
Right, and commercial viability. The friction is profound.
It's the clash between the Hippocratic imperative and the medical-industrial complex.
Precisely that. Medicine for Sale represents a logical intellectual progression. He's applying the diagnostic eye he developed in Vietnam to the structural failures of civilian society.
It's a transition from analyzing the trauma of the battlefield to analyzing the ethical decay within the institutions that are supposed to heal us at home.
Beautifully said.
His final book from this active period arrives in 1997, titled Lost Highway,
Which signals a return to those core Appalachian themes.
perhaps exploring the concept of the journey, the psychological drift of the veteran, or the search for a geographical and emotional anchor.
And producing works with this kind of thematic density does not go unnoticed by the critical establishment.
Not at all. Let's look at the sheer weight of his accolades. Because he was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize.
A Pulitzer nomination moves an author out of the realm of niche or genre fiction and places them firmly within the broader American literary canon.
It's institutional validation.
Yes, validation that his specific explorations of the veteran experience and Appalachian identity resonate as essential components of the national narrative.
He also won an O. Henry Award.
Which is essentially the pinnacle of recognition for short fiction.
And he was a Penn Hemingway Award finalist, highlighting exceptional debut or early career fiction. Add to that 2 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, and you are looking at a writer who had the full backing and critical respect of the literary world.
Those fellowships from the NEA are particularly telling. They represent an investment by the cultural establishment in his continued output.
He saw the value in his voice.
It demonstrates that the literary community recognized the rarity of his voice. Someone who possessed both the visceral lived experience of the combat medic and the refined, rigorous prose styling necessary to translate that experience into high art.
He also leveraged that expertise into the academic sphere, taking on roles as the D.H. Lawrence Fellow in Literature and serving as the writer-in-residence at the University of New Mexico. But perhaps the most defining aspect of his public intellectual life is his work as a speaker on the intersection of art and the military. For you listening, this is a fascinating dynamic to consider. How do you reconcile the rigid, highly structured, force-driven machinery of the military with the boundless, vulnerable, and inherently questioning nature of art?
The tension between those two spheres is exactly why their intersection is critical.
Because they seem fundamentally opposed.
They do. But combat, trauma, and war fundamentally rupture the bounds of normal human experience. The realities of a combat hospital or a jungle firefight cannot be adequately conveyed using the polite, everyday vocabulary of civilian life.
Everyday language simply breaks down under the weight of that trauma.
It breaks down entirely. If you have a society that deploys its citizens into those environments, and those citizens return with experiences that defy ordinary description, you create a dangerous societal silence.
An absolute disconnect between the veteran and the public.
Exactly. And art functions as the translation matrix.
I love that phrase, translation matrix.
Art is the only mechanism robust enough to bridge that silence. Whether it is through the careful architecture of a novel, the distilled emotion of poetry, or the raw honesty of a memoir, art provides a structural language for the inexpressible.
It allows the veteran to manipulate metaphor and narrative to finally explain the unexplainable to the civilian world.
And Curry's authority on the subject is absolute because he embodies both extremes. He survived the rigid machinery of the military, and he mastered the vulnerable architecture of literature to process it.
So to pull all of these threads together, we're looking at a trajectory that defies easy categorization. We started in the quiet isolation of Parkersburg, West Virginia, and followed Richard Curry through the absolute chaos of serving as a frontline medical corpsman in Vietnam.
We watched him return home only to deliberately disrupt his own reintegration.
By seeking out the vibrant, complex intellectual environment of Howard University in the 1970s.
He deliberately constructed a kaleidoscopic view of America, fusing working-class Appalachia, military trauma, and Black intellectualism into a single, cohesive literary perspective.
And from that foundation, he built a bibliography that transitioned from the raw documentary processing of a Vietnam journal to sweeping fictional narratives and even into sharp critiques of modern medical commercialism.
Earning the highest critical honors along the way.
From O. Henry Awards to a Pulitzer nomination, ultimately establishing himself as a vital translator between the silent realities of the veteran and the broader civilian world.
Now, there is a final layer to this biography that demands closer examination. We noted that his active publishing period abruptly concludes with Lost Highway in 1997.
Right.
If you look at the surface of the timeline, the output simply stops.
Which happens with a lot of authors.
It does. However, a deeper look at his bibliography reveals a fascinating phenomenon regarding the longevity of his work. The books did not fade into the archives. Decades later, the Santa Fe Writers Project began actively resurrecting his catalog.
Really?
Yes. They reprinted Fatal Light in 2009, they brought back The Wars of Heaven in 2014, and they republished his very first book, Crossing Over, a Vietnam journal, in 2018.
Wow. That is 20, 30, nearly 40 years after their original publication dates.
And consider the cultural context of those reprint dates. For you listening, think about 2009, 2014, and 2018.
Those are eras defined by entirely new global conflicts.
Exactly. The protracted weight of the global war on terror and deep domestic anxieties. This presents a profound final thought to mull over.
What's that?
What does it say about the enduring cyclical nature of societal trauma that an author's pen can rest in 1997, yet the stories he forged from the Vietnam era are continually demanded by new generations?
That's a powerful question.
It suggests that the acute observations Curry made about human fragility as a young corpsman are never truly relegated to the past. The art he created to survive his own era has simply become a necessary survival tool for the generations that followed.
Just waiting on the shelf for the moment, the culture required it again.
Exactly.
It reframes the entire concept of a literary legacy. It isn't just about the awards gathered in the moment, it is about the utility of the work decades down the line.
A vital translation matrix.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Richard Curry's deeply unconventional and vital American journey. Keep questioning the narratives around you. Keep looking for the intersections between disparate ideas, and we will see you on the next deep dive.